I'm Brooke Prentis, Wakka woman, Aboriginal Christian leader, educator, theologian, and poet.
So my name's Garry Deverell. I'm a Trawloolway man from the north of Loughrey or Tasmania. I'm a sometime Anglican priest, and occasionally I write a few things around matters pertaining to Aboriginal mob and theology, spirituality, those kinds of things.
I'm Professor Anne Pattel-Gray. I'm the Academic Director of the AACCES unit at the University of Queensland, and I'm an Aboriginal leader and elder, Bidjara woman, and it's a pleasure to be here with you.
Hiya, my name is Will Pickett. I come from Western Australia, born in Western Australia amongst the Noongar people, from my clan groups in Western Australia, the Willaman and the Gurindji and the Nang people of Western Australia, which my grandfathers and grandmothers derived from. I've been a minister of the Word in the United Church since 2004, after I'd candidated through the Congress, Uniting Aboriginal Christian Congress. I began my journey with Congress and the United Church.
What I said in my language was, I'm proud to be Wiradjuri, and my name is Glenn Loughrey. I am a priest and I'm working part-time in this role. I do spend a lot of time painting. I'm a recognised artist, been in finalist in 4 different national art prizes, big name of prizes. Have art in St Paul's Cathedral, have art in the ANU in Canberra. I'm also an associate professor at the ANU in Canberra, and have written 4 books and contributed to quite a number of others.
As an Aboriginal person living in these lands now called Australia since the referendum, life has been hard. For me, the rise of racism and the peculiar racism against Aboriginal people is on a scale I don't remember since I was 15 years old, so 30 years ago. People not willing to have conversations anymore, that once were willing to have conversations. And so I still just appeal to our nation to listen to each other with love and compassion. And that's my key message post-referendum, and I hope all Australians embrace it.
If I was to think positively about the result after the referendum, we do know that there are 6 million people who voted yes, and there are people out there who sit underneath all the political and the cultural war spaces who are committed to supporting Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and to support them forward. So what the referendum did, in positively, was to bring forward those people and make them visible and give them an opportunity to engage further. The difficulty, I think, for me was that I did 123 presentations on the referendum across Australia, and it had become very clear to me, and I was doing mostly faith-based communities.
As an Aboriginal person living in these lands now called Australia since the referendum, life has been hard. For me, the rise of racism and the peculiar racism against Aboriginal people is on a scale I don't remember since I was 15 years old, so 30 years ago. People not willing to have conversations anymore, that once were willing to have conversations. And so I still just appeal to our nation to listen to each other with love and compassion.
And I discovered very early on from the high level down in all churches that there was, I could use the word racism, embedded in the system, embedded in the way people thought. And at best, the church was 50% in favour. And I found that it was not a passive no, it was an aggressive no. I wanted to find inside the church and inside people who follow or claim to follow Jesus, who was the architect of reconciliation and the embodiment of reconciliation. I wanted to see if that actually existed. I wanted it had to get better. You know, every time I did it, it had to get better, but it never got better. It got better. And I think the fact that I'm in my position now inside the church is a positive, but I don't think that. I think for Aboriginal people, the racism's got worse. It's more blatant, more in your face.
Well, I think there's a kind of head and heart thing that's gone on both, well, probably in the time leading up to the referendum itself, and then afterwards. And what I mean by that is, I think many of us knew in our heads that it would probably fail because of the historical precedents. If you don't have bipartisan support for a referendum, then it's very, very likely to fail. So I think we're all in our heads preparing for that. But in our hearts, if you like, in our emotional life, I think many of us still felt the impact of that. Felt the impact of, 2/3 of voting Australians deciding that it wasn't a good idea to have a voice for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the Westminster apparatus of our country, so that we could have a say into policy and so forth that was more direct. I think that particularly our young people were really messed around by that. Many of our young people were severely kind of affected and felt like they'd really been kicked in the guts.
Oh, there's been major shift in Australia, negative, not positive, unfortunately. And the shift since the referendum, was a resounding rejection of Aboriginal people, and particularly, their hand of the extended of grace to Australia to give us recognition as the First Nations peoples of this land. We seem to have taken a step back some 50 years or more, probably back to the 50s, I would say, 1950s, where, racism was the norm. It was an acceptable view within white Australia. The issues that arose out of that context of the referendum have never been addressed officially by government nor by community. And I don't think it's a safe place for community to address it. What we're doing is trying to find places where we can meet and gather to reflect, to discuss, but also to heal and find opportunities of identifying our strategic path as we go forward and what that might look like. It certainly doesn't mean the struggle for justice ends. It just means we've got to be more strategic about how we go about it and looking for the allies that are prepared to walk with us in this space, because it's becoming more and more, visible that we need our allies in order to bring about the change that we need in Australia.
So as an Aboriginal person living in Australia, it's hard. Racism, discrimination and prejudice views are a constant and have been for many years of my whole lifetime. And since the referendum, there's a sadness that the opportunity of a voice was sort of ripped away from this generation and many generations to come. And although during the referendum we saw hope and solidarity with thousands, some kindness and understanding from Second Nations peoples, there was a lot of hurt, and there still is a lot of hurt in not only my heart but many of our people's hearts who wanted to see a change, who wanted the voice to go through and wanted a voice in Parliament. But the one thing about the Aboriginal people, regardless of the outcome of the referendum, is that we are strong. We continue to stand up, and we aren't going anywhere at the moment.
I often get asked by non-Indigenous peoples where my strength comes from, and that how do I keep going? And I think it is a strength that I tune into. It's a strength of my peoples, my elders, past and present, my culture, to know that you're part of the world's oldest living continuing cultures. And sometimes that phrase is said as a bit of rhetoric and people don't stop to pause. What does that actually mean? The world's oldest living continuing cultures. And so that gives me a lot of strength. My Christian faith gives me a lot of strength. I'm so grateful that Jesus is part of my life and I cling to Jesus quite literally.
People find they're able to cope because they go back into mob and back into culture and back into space. It's much more difficult for people like me to find that mob connection because I'm in Melbourne, I'm Wiradjuri, I'm not Wiradjuri, there's different families. And because of my family background, I can't show all the things that people want to see. To answer your question, I think I just keep going by sheer doggedness because I do want the next generation not to have the experience of trauma that I lived through as a child that has discombobulated my life.
But I think, for many Aboriginal people say that our strength comes from country. Country for us is not just piece of land or bit of real estate. It's our community. So the creatures that live there, the sense of ancestral presence from days gone by is there. Many of us have had profound experiences where we don't quite know where to turn, and we go for a walk on our own country and we find instruction, we find guidance, to keep going. If I want to draw an analogy, as I often do, between Aboriginal experience and wider Christian experience, I would say that this is our kind of form of prayer. Just as Christians find their strength from prayer, from embedding ourselves in God, so Aboriginal people get our strength from embedding ourselves in country. Really, strength has to come from, first of all, country, but second of all, that kind of sense of community and coalition.
That comes from my culture and identity, my spiritual basis and formation as an Indigenous woman is what grounds me and what gives me resilience and strength to continue in the battle. I feel compelled, and I am compelled because I have a strong call from God to speak truth and to hold church accountable. And, what I'm finding is when I look at this institution called church, what I'm finding in the congregations, in the community, are these individuals that walk with me asking the same questions. And that resonates with me. That gives me strength because I think, well, I'm not alone. I'm not the lone crusader here.
So personally, my strength comes from my people's strength. I'm only I can speak from passionately about from Noongar background, but since I've been in many states across Australia, I see the same thing happening, same strength from within the different diverse Aboriginal groups across Australia. I believe strongly that strength comes from our families and our connections to land and the connected identity with ourselves, within ourselves as well. Our strength is our resilience and our ability to push through and stand together, to stand arm in arm and to fight for our rights and to continually pass our resilience and practices and our values onto our children, our next generations. When our children's strengths come from knowledge, like myself and like the generation before us, knowledge which was handed down by our elders as we passed it on, strength in our song lines, strength in our stories and our histories, our strength is being connected to these retelling of stories over and over, these and also implementing them into our lives so that it can be passed on again and again. So our strength, my strength, is our ability to be bold and proud of who we are. Our strength is knowing who we are as the oldest living and group of people in Australia, an example such as the songlines that is true to all people's Aboriginal background.
Where I see the signs of hope are actually during things like National Naidoc Week. It's 1 week from a Sunday to a Sunday, the first Sunday in July to the second Sunday of July, where we actually just get to have a massive party. The reality is, as Aboriginal peoples, we know during that celebration and party that there will be things happening. During National Naidoc Week, we had an Aboriginal death in custody. We've just had the release of the UROC Truth-Telling Commission report. Many recommendations that need to be addressed. My hope will be in seeing those recommendations addressed. So where those signs of hope are is we will see it within our own communities, our own Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. When we come together as community, that is where strength and vision and legacy are contained. And so that is a deep hope. But it's when our non-Indigenous peoples and friends turn up, they show up and they keep showing up.
My vision is that we get to a stage where Aboriginal people aren't a threat. Aboriginal people are seen as equal. We shouldn't be I mean, this is one of my issues with Naidoc Week. You know, we have this Naidoc Week where we celebrate Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Every week, every day is the National Aboriginal Day of celebration. And we seem to want to just celebrate us when we become doctors, lawyers, teachers and such. But we don't ever recognise our doctors, lawyers and teachers and such who are traditional, who have always been there, who, you know, and we don't do any of that kind of thing. So I want to be able to have our people. If a young person comes through and says, I just want to be a person who looks after the medicine plants and carry medicine knowledge in my community and do then we should be giving him a big tick and supporting him or her to do that. So I wanted to become more inclusive of who we are as people.
Yeah, I think that there's an extraordinary generation of younger people coming through who have had the benefit of what we've been able to do. And therefore, I think there's more very capable, very strong-hearted, and very well-educated, importantly, young people coming through who are working in a whole range of different fields to improve things for our people just that little bit, you know, to improve things for our environment, for country, just that little bit. So I feel like there's a kind of a big bell curve coming up of people who are very, very capable, know who they are, have got the kind of educational capacity that they need to engage the issues. And yeah, I think it's going to be great. I'm one of these people who thinks that education is really important. So we need to have a vision for how we do education. It has to be education that is in the public sector, not just in a private sector that's really well resourced, but in the public sector, which is not so well resourced. And it has to be about working, as the Catholics have always known, working with kids primarily. Because I think the generation above mine is kind of rusted in to a large degree and is just operating out of a series of scripts that have always been there, that they learned about at school. The number of times I give a talk and someone will tell me that their teacher in grade 4 in 1948 told them this, and they don't see any reason to change that, you know. I think there's a kind of a rusted on nature to that. So I feel like the vision for the future has to be education with young people, has to be public sector education. It has to be led by, I think, institutions. So obviously government as an institution, but also I think the churches as institution could get involved in that. I think there's better and wider and deeper buy-in from Islamic society in Australia. So I feel like there's a lot of hope there as well. Given that, you know, most religious people in Australia are now Muslims rather than Christians. So I think some of these kinds of things are the kinds of visions which have some legs. Yeah, because I really think it's about changing hearts, and education that's about affective change rather than just changing information is, I think, really what it's all about. Yeah.
And what I hope to see, and I may not see it in my lifetime, but I hope that the church can be true to their calling. And I hope that they become the leaders that this country needs to see to bring about the justice and the truth that needs to be spoken in order that Aboriginal people secure their rightful place in a treaty and the reparations that are due to our people.
At the moment, I envisage an Australia where Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples are no longer marginalised. I envision freedom from having the highest incarceration rates in Australia, to freedom from being discriminated against when applying for a simple rental or job in Australia. It's only a month ago that I was catching a bus from my children's secondary school and waiting for the bus, and the bus driver came down, and when he saw that I was waiting, and instead of pulling up to pick me up, he turned his in service to non-service and drove around me and didn't pick me up. So I envision Australia that doesn't fight against this country's First Nations people, but as an Australian, that we officially and formally recognise all Aboriginal peoples.
Legacy is a really interesting word to be part of this National Naidoc Week theme. And as I do a lot of work in schools and with students and teachers, trying to describe what legacy is, particularly to someone who's 10 years old, has been quite a challenge. And so I've talked about how it's about looking into our past, thinking about where we are in the present and what has impacted us, and then what we want to carry into the future. So legacy is really about those important events and peoples in our past and in our present that we're going to carry together into the future. And there's so many inspiring stories of Aboriginal peoples of the past and present that are leaving a legacy. Naidoc Week is a legacy. It's now over 50 years old. And, you know, as I think about legacy, I think into the future. In 50 years' time, who will be, if God willing, I'm still here, who will be with me through those 50 years? And will Naidoc still be here in 50 years? And I think it will, because it's been such an important thing. Those themes of National Naidoc Week are actually our one way as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples to communicate an important message to the nation. And since the 1970s, over 50 years, across 6 decades, we've been communicating one important message every year.
Well, for Aboriginal people and traditional cultures, we always look several generations down the line. So what are we doing today? How's that going to leave our kids in 5, 6, 7 generations' time? So legacy to me means that the work we do today needs to leave the world better than it was before we left it. And that in some way it is paving the way and setting up a positive outcome for our grandchildren and great-grandchildren. While we live in the present, we act as if the present will take us into the future, so that those who are there benefit from what we've done today. And that's part of how we got 65,000 years. If we hadn't had that legacy thinking, we wouldn't have survived all the things that came to us in those 65,000 years to be still here.
Legacy is just that very, very ordinary human thing of passing on what you've learned in life to the next generation. And certainly in the sense of working towards a justice which has not yet entirely arrived and probably never will. It's about putting in place foundations that the next generation can build on. And, I'm a beneficiary of incredible work that has been done by my elders. And, my children and our children will be the beneficiaries of what we do ourselves in this generation.
Yeah, well, I think it's a responsibility for us to leave legacy to the next generation. When you consider, the work that we've done, how have we ensured that the work that we've done is passed on and generated to the next generations for those to pick up the mantle? Have we done enough work? Have we opened doors that allow for our people to access, tertiary education, leadership, whatever it may look like? What are we doing to cut those paths? We have an enormous responsibility to do that.
So legacy is a long-lasting impact. It's an impact that all will know and remember our legacy. I believe, which is our survival. Our survival is our legacy. It is a story that will be shared forever. In our resistance is one of our legacies. 65,000 plus years of resistance in Australia. And that legacy is these stories that we have left behind that will continue to be shared long after we leave this world.
So one of the biggest myths that I'm challenged on constantly or asked questions about, but usually they don't come in the form of a question. It's actually people's knowledge, which is why it's a myth that comes out, and that is that Aboriginal people get a free house, Aboriginal people get a free car, Aboriginal people get a free education, and then there's also this $40 billion that we apparently get from the government. I've never received 1 cent from the government for being Aboriginal. We don't get free house, free car, free education. Sometimes if we do get any government benefits, it's exactly the same amount as non-Indigenous people get for the same benefit. It's just called something different. So Oz study, AB study, these are things people really need to know. Sometimes, like through education, we might have additional opportunities for tutoring, but people need to understand the true history of this country, that up until the 1970s, Aboriginal people were only allowed to go to grade 4. And so how our true history has affected our present, that's a big part that's always missing from the conversation. I think some of the other things I've often got, Aboriginal people don't have to pay tax. And when I say, no, we have to pay tax. If we're working, we have to pay tax. And people just don't want to believe you, but it's that we have to listen to the lived experience. Aboriginal people know what we can and can't get. People who say Aboriginal people are all on Centrelink. The truth is, most of our people, and as an Aboriginal pastor, most of our people can't be bothered with Centrelink and the bureaucracy. And because they don't have stable accommodation and there's so much homelessness within the Aboriginal population, they've got no fixed address. And so they're getting cut off by Centrelink. And so they don't even bother with Centrelink. And so it's our community, through that sharing of our resources, that we look after one another. My hope is that the Australian churches would start to help to care for and love their Aboriginal neighbour as themselves, but they're not doing that on a grand enough scale at all.
Yeah, well, I think there's some big myths out there. The biggest myth is that we don't really exist. I think there's still a lot of people who have what I call a sort of a practical level of terra nullius going on in their sort of social imaginary. So, people think they've never really met any Aboriginal people and therefore you don't need to think about Aboriginal people, that kind of stuff. But we do exist. We've survived. And many of us thrive. Many of us are, of course, in incredible trouble because of the legacy of colonisation. But we're here. And I think that's itself quite an extraordinary thing for many people to get their head around.
Yeah, one of those myths is that Aboriginal people are lazy, and cannot work and haven't got the the same mindset or the academic understanding to be able to opposite to Second Nations people, a lot of people have this stigma that Aboriginal people, if they've got a fancy car, that it's either been given to them or if they've got a big house that's been given to them by the government and all. So there's a lot of stigmas out there that are still happening around Australia.
I suppose the other big myth that's around is that that persists is that Aboriginal people look a certain way, and they're usually I call it the Channel 7 stereotype. So it's the old woman or the old man sitting under a tree somewhere in the Northern Territory.
When I was going through high school 30 years ago, people would say, "Oh, you can't be Aboriginal. You don't look Aboriginal. There aren't any Aboriginal people." And I thought by the year 2025 that people would be educated enough to know who Aboriginal people were in this nation, what had happened to us, and why our skin colour might be fair.
The reality is that we are who we are because of colonisation. Almost every Aboriginal person in the country, whether they be, dark skin, light skin in the Northern Territory or in the middle of Melbourne, has both a colonial and an Indigenous heritage. And so we negotiate that along with everyone else, but we're just a bit more explicit about the ways in which some part of our heritage have seriously missed out and need to get some attention, that kind of stuff.
If you don't know why my skin colour is the colour it is, you don't know the true history of this country, and you don't know the horrific decisions my Aboriginal matriarchs had to make for me to be here and to survive today, for our family to survive. And on the other side of that is that we celebrate, we come in all shades of deadly. Deadly means something's really awesome, really, really good. It's also a word that kind of came to prominence 30 years ago and gives me strength, deadly. And so Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people come in shades of deadly. Aboriginality is not based on skin colour. It's based, there's actually a government definition, which is a 3-part definition. To be Aboriginal in this country, you have to have an Aboriginal heritage, you have to self-identify, and you have to be part of the community, part of the Aboriginal community.
We've got the same aspirations and visions and goals, just as the Second Nations people, to look after our family, which is most important, and to give them a future in every aspect, education, financially as well. It's a hard road.
One of the things I love about Naidoc Week and the themes, I often get to preach in churches on either Sunday about what the theme is. And so to think about each of the Naidoc Week themes and what the Christian message is in them. And so strength, vision and legacy, there's so much in there, I think, for Christians to think about, to consider. And where I'm really thinking about is those Aboriginal Christian leaders. People like William Cooper, who is actually the founder of Naidoc Week, and Pearl Gibbs. These people were driven not just by their Aboriginality to fight for justice and equality and for love, but also their Christian faith. And that's a huge legacy to leave to us as the next generation of Aboriginal Christian leaders, but also to non-Indigenous Christians as well. And then that strength, vision and legacy, we need you to support us into the next generations, our senior Aboriginal Christian leaders like Auntie Dr. Jean Phillips, Uncle Dr. Pastor Ray Minnicon, Auntie Reverend Dr. Denise Champion, Auntie Dr. Professor Ann Pattel-Gray, Uncle Reverend Neville Naden, and so many others, Uncle Reverend Willie Pickett, so many incredible senior Aboriginal Christian leaders today who inspire us as the next generation and need the support of Christians and the church. And to really look at Jesus's words as to where the strength, vision, and legacy comes for us as Christians. It's not to be comfortable with the status quo. The status quo means my people die too young and too often, facing injustice and racism each and every day. And that's not an over-exaggeration. It is each and every day. That means for me personally, I'm not talking about other people, it's each and every day. And so Jesus has a lot to say about justice and compassion and kindness and love.